Can you guys hear me? Do I need a microphone? Or I'm pretty loud? I'm pretty loud. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Thank you again for having me. This is actually, I think, my first time to be at the campus of UC Riverside. 23 years ago, I was on University Avenue in one of the law firms working as a summer associate. And that was, I think, the only time I was here in Riverside. So I was driving and I was like, God, this is kind of far, but it's actually kind of pretty. I've always taken the 10 freeway whenever I would go to Palm Springs, but I think next time I'm going to try to go down south and take 60 all the way. But I'm very privileged and very thankful and honored to be invited to speak to you guys, especially, and congratulations, Mr. Associate Dean. And I was just talking with Christina and Mark, and the School of Public Policy is relatively, it's in its infancy. Yeah, baby programs here. But how exciting! Maybe I can come down and be a student. Yes, I've been in the Capitol now for, God, when you talk about 12 years. Can't believe it's been 12 years, and serving under my 5th speaker. But I never thought I would work in politics. That's why I called it, the journey of an accidental activist. Who among here are immigrants? First-generation immigrants. Who's the first one to go to college? A lot of you guys. Veterans? LGBT? You don't have to self-identify if you don't want to. So those are some of my identity politics that I deal with. My family immigrated here in 1985. I was relatively older. I was 18. I never thought that I would come to the United States. I'm originally from the Philippines. And just like, most immigrants, we come to this country thinking you're going to be as powerful and as rich as you can be with all of the opportunities this country has to offer. And you still can. And that's the beauty of being an American. But coming from the Philippines and starting from scratch, my family, back in the Philippines, my parents were paying for all my education. So coming here, I was like, we're starting from scratch, and I had no idea how to go about getting to college. So I saw what the Air Force was offering. We'll pay you your tuition if you join the Air Force. So I joined the military, and thank God I did, because I grew up. It really made me more disciplined and really have the structure that most teenagers need when they're starting from scratch. And if not for the Air Force, I don't think I would be here. So I owe a lot to what the military offered me. But joining the military, it was one of those things that I wanted to do to get my education done. And to tell you the truth, my idea of working in the United States was to be a Wall Street broker. Anybody seen Wall Street? For the younger generation, that's probably what you've heard about. But for my generation, it was the movie called Wall Street, or the book if you've read it. Made infamous by Michael Douglas playing Gordon Gekko, and the famous line that he said in that movie, "Greed is good." And that's what I wanted to do, was to work on Wall Street, work on corporate takeover, mergers and acquisitions, things like that. But the market crash of 1987 got me scared, because a lot of people were out of jobs. So I was like, what do I want to do? I don't want to just go there and then the next thing you know, I'm packing my boxes of stuff and with no job. So I was like, hey, maybe I can get an MBA. No MBA, dime a dozen at that time. Law school was another option, maybe do corporate law. So yeah, I went to law school. I went to the University of Iowa. Don't ask me how I got there, but it's one of those recruitment they did. And then working at that law firm here 23 years ago and spending 12 to 16-hour days just as a summer associate and working on stuff that you thought is, you know, I was doing it, I thought I was helping people, and you are helping people, but maybe not your kind of people. So after that experience, I was like, God, I worked on a case where we won on a technicality. We were able to get away from not paying for a medical malpractice, and it didn't make me feel good. That was not what that's not my idea of helping, and being a lawyer. So, finished law school, came back to Los Angeles, didn't really want to be a lawyer, so what did I start doing? I started volunteering. I started volunteering for a couple of organizations called the Land Legal Defense and Education Fund, which is a non-profit law firm that is doing impact litigation to this day. And I also volunteer at the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center. So my journey is really more of unplanned. Nothing really, everything was happenstance. I just happened to meet the right kind of people who kind of guided me through this process. And that's how I ended up being in the Capitol. Working at the Land Legal Defense Fund, the managing attorney there started the public policy department at the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center. And then from there, he asked me, "Did you want to join me at the LA Gay and Lesbian Center to be a public policy associate?" And I was like, "What is that?" There's a lot of things a public policy associate would do. Just a hodgepodge of things, from researching laws to what current policies are, if there are any policies that can be changed, or if there are new policies that need to be enacted. You can be working on the local level, dealing with the city council, or even school district, or you can go up to Sacramento to deal with the state legislature and the state government, or Congress if you are interested in federal policies, national policies in Washington, D.C. So I was like, okay, I'll join. So I was up at the LA Gay and Lesbian Center in 1995, and a couple of times I was invited to testify, came up to Sacramento to testify at one of the policy committees, the education committee, and at that time we were working on student non-discrimination in public schools. And I was invited to testify, and the organization that eventually became my employer invited me, and a year or two later they started recruiting me to become a lobbyist. And I'm like, what is a lobbyist? Well, basically you'll be an advocate for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, to work on issues that would advance equal rights for LGBT Californians. And I said, that sounds like very promising and very interesting. And I was like, okay. So I got recruited, and I moved up to Sacramento in 1997. All my friends in Los Angeles thought I was crazy. I was like, why would you move to Sacramento? Sacktown, Cowtown. And they told me, I was like, oh, in 2 years you'll be back. That was 1997. 17 years later, I'm still there. And happily married, met my husband in Sacramento, and that's how I got up to Sacramento and started lobbying, working on issues from marriage equality to the predecessor to that, of course, is the enactment of the domestic partnership registration. We also work on anti-discrimination in employment and housing, anti-violence program, dealing with school, with kids, with youth, and we also work on HIV/AIDS related issues, funding for HIV/AIDS treatment and education and prevention. So I was doing that for nearly 5 years, and then suddenly I got a call from the office of the Speaker of the California State Assembly. When you get a call from a member, you know, it's either good or bad. It's bad if you screw things up for any legislation that they're working on, or good if you're doing something and they want you to help them or sponsor any legislation or any ideas you have that they want that a member want to carry. So I got a call, and at that time, the speaker was Herb Wesson, who is now the president of the Los Angeles City Council. He basically asked me, it's like, do you want to work for me? And I'm like, I'm not looking for a job. Well, I need somebody to be my liaison to the LGBT community. I was like, well, I guess I could do that. So, can you start tomorrow? And I'm like, no, I work for a nonprofit organization. You got to give them time to find my replacement. So that was my first foray into state legislature, inside, as an insider, to work inside the halls of the Capitol, where you get so intimate with so many details that sometimes you think your world is just so, you get so isolated from that you don't know what's really going on outside. So it's actually nice to be out with you guys to talk about some of these things that we do in the Capitol. The legislature is, are most of you Californians? So our state legislature is just like Congress. We have two houses, the Assembly and the Senate. We call our house the People's House, even though it's supposed to be the lower house. We just call ourselves the bigger house because we have 80 members of the Assembly. The Senate is the upper house. They have 40 members in the Senate. The old term limits that apply to a lot of the members who are starting their last 2 years was passed back in 1990, Proposition 140. At that time, the term limit, it was enacted where Assembly members can only serve up to 6 years, so basically 3 terms. And then they can go to the Senate and serve for 2 terms of 4 years, so 8 years. So we have a total of 14 years for what we call the Prop 140 babies. And some of those who started in the Assembly are ending, 4 years ago, they're starting their last term, and they'll be ending their term in 2016. My current boss, Speaker Toni Atkins, is a product of 140. 2 years ago, Proposition 28 was passed by the voters, and it changed term limits, and it limited now to 12 years. So we went from 14 years to 12 years. But the difference with this one, a legislator can serve in one or both houses. I'm telling you this because I'll explain why, to us, a lot of the staffers and a lot of folks who've been working in policy making and politics think that term limits can have a negative consequence. As the professor told you, with term limits, with a lot of the turnover of members, we lost good members who became expert in whatever policy that they were interested in. With the term limits, with the old term limits, a lot of the members, once they get elected, they were already looking forward to where they will go next. So they're busy trying to figure out, okay, which seat can I take over once my limit is up in the Assembly. So they're looking on the Senate side. But with the new term limit, the members could actually stay in the Assembly for the next 12 years, thereby making their stay much more, hopefully, productive, and they can establish the kind of relationships that you need when you're working in politics. I've been telling some of the folks that we have in the Capitol the younger ones, that politics is all about relationships, especially in working in the state legislature. The relationship you make with your fellow legislators and the staff are pretty critical in how you move your ideas forward from that very tiny idea that you may have and working it through the process and getting it enacted into law with the governor signing it. And of course getting it implemented by the executive branch. The thing about working in the legislature, a lot of people ask me, especially my friends who are kind of apolitical, the only thing at least I get them to do is vote. I hope most of you voted last week. The turnout rate for this year's election, midterm election, is pretty dismal. I think we're hovering around 28, 29%. I mean, can you imagine 28 or 29% of the population making decisions on behalf of the rest of the state of California? And we have 38 million Californians.
I think that's the lowest in 7 decades.
In decades. So it's pretty sad. Hopefully we can increase that in 2 years when the presidential election is up. You know, as the professor said, under the old term limits, staff and lobbyists have the institutional memory. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to work on legislation that not only affected me personally, but for the most part, you know, hopefully the next generation of LGBT Californians will have a much better experience in dealing with some of the things. You know, for the longest time, I'll give you an example, and he was on active duty in the United States Air Force. So nearly from 1999 until the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was lifted in 2011, we could not be seen, or you know, at least not be conspicuous about our relationship. Many times we would run into a few of his colleagues, and we would get out of the way and go someplace else. I mean, we could even, like, when I would drop him off at Travis Air Force Base during his deployment, because he's a veteran of the Kosovo conflict, the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan, and he's a pilot. He's I call him the gas station up in the air pilot. He's a tanker pilot. They do refueling. When he would get deployed, I would drop him off. I mean, I couldn't even give him a hug because of, you know, we're afraid that people may think, you know, even though it was a lot of now that he's out, a lot of his colleagues actually, well, we knew you were gay. I mean, you didn't really have to hide it. But it's one of those things with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, you didn't want to take any chance of getting found out. And if you have somebody who's anti-gay in the military, they can actually come, you know, do something that would affect his career. So I'm happy to say that after, you know, with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy being lifted, and he actually was openly gay for 6 days. Because he retired 6 days after the policy was lifted. And then, but the other thing that we had to deal with was, you know, we got married in Canada in 2007, but for the longest time we didn't have marriage equality. Our marriage was not recognized. California recognized it in 2008 for about 5 months, in June of 2008 until November, when Prop 8 was passed, and then we had to go through the process of challenging Prop 8, and then last year, the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated Prop 8, and then invalidated the Defense of Marriage Act, which was the federal, you know, the anti-recognition of shopping now by myself to the commissary and the BX without my husband behind me checking what I'm buying. So those are some of the things that I've been able to work on. I started working on the LGBT issues, and then the speakers, the previous speakers I've worked for have given me some, other policy areas to cover, including aging and long-term care, which I asked for because it's something that I care about. Filipinos are very, we revere our elders, and the way the aging population is being treated in a lot of Western countries, the last thing I would want happen to my mom. She's 78, and thankfully she's very healthy. I don't think I could see putting my mom in a nursing home, just leaving her there. I would take care of my mom, and that's how I kind of approach the issue of aging and long-term care. Thankfully, we're getting a lot of Filipinos taking care of the elders, even to the point of some of my friends in the Philippines are actually talking about becoming caregivers. So, they get paid down here. And I also work on arts and entertainment. The committee is called Arts, Entertainment, Sports, Tourism, and Internet Media. So I get to cover all those issues.
Could you say more about why such a broad?
I think because the way, it's kind of, they put them all together because they tend to have kind of like, a similar effect, for, the entertainment aspect of things, even though, professional sports, like, yeah, it's not supposed to be about entertainment, but you do get entertained about that. With tourism, just because it's all about, the visual, and I don't know how they came up with it, but it's a very, very fun committee. Then last year they just gave me banking and finance, which, came back in full circle for me because in law school that's what I studied a lot. And when they offered it to me, I was like, now it's coming back to haunt me, banking and finance. So, the way I got to the Capitol, it's very certain, I didn't follow any path. It just happened that way. But for most of you, because if I had to do it all over again, I probably would go and study public policy instead. But I didn't know that. And I had no idea that this was something I could work on. So if you guys are interested in policy making, working in the Capitol is one of the most rewarding and most fun things to do. It's good to find a job where you're actually having fun, you're enjoying yourself, you feel like you're making a difference, and getting paid for it. It's not a whole lot of money, this line of work, I guess it depends on where you are. If you're working in the Capitol, it is, after all, a state government job. But as a lobbyist, if you're a lobbyist for a corporation or, some of the foundations, they have their own lobbyists. Or if you still, if you work for a nonprofit organization, of course, you're not going to get paid as much. But it's a very rewarding career. People have come from all walks of life doing this line of work. They've either have done things, working on issues. Specifically, we have folks who are social workers, we have folks who are lawyers, and then we have folks who, we even have folks in the medical profession started working on policy. You can either do it the way, it could happen the way I've done it, where I got involved in community organizing, from community organizing to being exposed to the state legislative process, and getting recruited to do it. Cassie, I think, is familiar with the one that I'm going to mention. We also have the Capital Fellows Program. It's done through the Center for California Studies at Cal State, Sacramento State. Every year, they select 18, basically, help me with my math here, 36 plus 36, 72. Basically 72 folks, 18 from each branch of the government. 18 fellows will work in the Assembly, 18 will work in the Senate, 18 in the executive branch, and then 18 in the judicial branch. If you're interested, how many of you are graduating next year? Great. You have until February 9th to apply. It's one of the most intensive fellowship programs in the country, and one of the most prestigious, and it's very selective. I happened to be on the selection committee in 2011 and in 2012. After 2012, I said I can't do this anymore because I can't read 500 applications. It's super competitive. When I read some of the when I read the applications, I was like, if I had applied for this, I probably would have not gotten in. But we get folks from all over the country, and we even get folks. I mean, it's geared more towards undergrads, but we get folks from who have graduate degrees. Some of them have PhDs, some of them have professional degrees. But it's a 10 to 11 month program, and you get a stipend and some of the benefits, and that's how you get your foot at the door. If you become a fellow, most of the time the member would hire you in his or her office. Sometimes you will find other opportunities working, and we have a lot of people, a lot of volunteers who are interested in getting to work in the Capitol, and a lot of them are, of course, trying to line up jobs now that the election is over. So political campaign is also another way of getting into working in the state legislature. But there's a lot of things you could do to get into this, to work in state government. You can work in the state legislature if you're interested in policy making, and you can also work in the executive branch, if you want to work with the governor or any of the agencies, get any appointments like that. But that's more of the implementation side of the policies that are being drafted by the legislature. So there's, this branch, what we call the branch of government, the system of checks and balances, where the policies are enacted by the legislature to be implemented by the executive branch, and then you've got the judicial branch making sure that what the legislature is enacting is constitutional, and the executive branch is implementing them the way that the legislature has actually intended those policies. So, any questions so far? I don't want to keep talking.
Yes, one of the things I was going to say, so this fellowship program is very competitive. So one of our star students who ended up getting into the Kennedy School did not make it past the final round of your guys' program. So it is very competitive. But I do want to then talk about what are other ways. I think you touched upon some of that. And I have some students who. There's nothing wrong with law school, although I think now it's getting a little bit more challenging in terms of legal careers.
Yeah.
But what are some of the ways, so when you see people who don't have law degrees, what is that kind of pathway? Is it through the nonprofit sector? Or
through the or campaigning, or through the nonprofit or campaigning. Because so when I finished law school, I working with the couple of nonprofit organizations that they were the ones that kind of introduced me to this thing, because they also were involved in influencing legislation. When we worked on the on the domestic partnership bill and all of the LGBT-related bills, we were working with Land Illegal Defense Fund and the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, two of the organizations, and all the other organizations that are rights organizations working on LGBT issues, they would be our resources as far as like inviting them to testify or getting their support on any pieces of legislation we're working on. So working for nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations would be one thing. So, like if you are interested in working on immigration issues, there's a lot of organizations out there working on immigrants' rights. If you're interested in environmental justice, we have a lot of environmental organizations, whether it's the Sierra Club or the League of Conservation Voters, or the Natural Resources Defense Council. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, because like, since you went to law school, because I'm interested in going to law school this coming fall.
Okay.
Sometime right now. But like I've heard Professor Albuquerque, he's been saying like, there's other routes and stuff like that, so you really get thinking like, oh my gosh, is this the right decision kind of thing? And plus it's a lot of money. So if you want to do policy, is law a good way to go, or is it like, would you recommend, okay, maybe consider doing something else?
I wouldn't discourage you from going to law school if you have an idea of what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because, like what you said, it's a very expensive program, and it's 3 years if you're a full-time student. But if you know what you want to do with your legal degree, because if you want to do policy making, you don't necessarily have to go to law school. Although, knowing the law or some of the legal processes you learn, the skills you acquire, it's very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm not an attorney, I'm not a licensed attorney, but having to deal with attorneys of Universal or NBC or Fox when I was working on the paparazzi reform bill, I actually got to meet Jennifer Aniston. It's one of the beauty of working in arts and entertainment. And of course, I didn't ask for a picture just because I was working on a paparazzi bill. So, but she was very pleasant, very down to earth. So, working on First Amendment, working against, I wouldn't call working against, but working with the attorneys, because they would bring up all kinds of issues. Well, you can't really do this because you're going to be chilling speech. You're going to infringe on news gathering, and it's like, no, that's not what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
It's like, so you
get like
you get the background, because they would be citing cases and Supreme Court cases, and I was like, no, and I was like, that's not how the Supreme Court decided. So it's the kind of skills you have that you can go toe to toe. I was like, the lobbyists for Fox actually looked at their contract, their senior VP of governmental affairs looked at their lobbyists like, you thought you can get away with dealing with Eric just because you think you can be able to deal with our lawyers, huh?
Yeah.
And they're like, sometimes, So I don't bring out the legal thing until I need to use it. But
one thing I should clarify, I don't discourage people to go to law school.
Yeah.
But it's precisely the same thing. I think it's mentioned too. Figure out what you want to do with the degree, and also ask people that are doing the kinds of jobs you think you want to be doing to figure out. And part of it, things change too. So kind of what things look like now might be different from 10 or 20 years ago. So just be very clear on that, and especially given the kind of financial investment too.
Yeah.
Because there's also stories of people going to good law schools kind of struggling afterwards. And the key is, if you know exactly what you want to do with the tools you have, and also the skills. So there's different kinds of skills, right? There's legal skills, there are people who could do quantitative skills, people who know how to analyze other kinds of information. So building those skills can be so helpful.
Yeah. If you can get into a law school where they actually offer to pay for 3 years. Okay. That's how I did it. That's how I was able to do this, we have a number of, I have a number of friends who had to work for 10 to 15 years to pay off their student
Yeah.
loans.
That's probably what.
Yeah, 10, maybe 20 years.
So Iowa was willing to give you scholarships.
Oh yeah, they called me, they're like, I don't even know where Iowa is. That's
Yeah.
That was my response.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, yeah. Any other questions?
I also come from a community organizing background, and I just wanted to know about any growing pains, if any, you had while moving into the private sector.
I'm sure you probably have experienced working in nonprofit organization. You get burned out. I mean, I don't know how I managed to last working in a nonprofit organization for 5 years. They said that the average number of years working in nonprofit is 2 years. You kind of almost have to take a sabbatical after 2 years. But working in nonprofit organization and moving into the private sector, I mean, you definitely have to adapt to a different paradigm working in nonprofit organizations. Because I tend to think most nonprofit organizations have that kind of like the bottom-up approach as opposed to the top-down that most in the private sector would deal with. So the frustration that you will probably experience working in the private sector coming from nonprofit, that's probably one of the culture shock you will experience working in the private sector. I haven't really worked. I mean, other than working in private nonprofit organization, where you don't deal with a whole lot of. I mean, if you work for a nonprofit organization, most of your funding are coming from the public. It's almost like you're working in the public sector. But working in the private sector, because I've been recruited to work as a lobbyist for some pharmaceutical company, and I've resisted, but it's a very different.
You don't want money.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should. But I think I put in my time. That's what we keep saying. Yeah, I mean it's a different world. I've known some people who have stayed working in the private sector for a couple of years and ended up coming back working in the capital, getting paid more because they have to the capital have to match what they're getting paid for.
Yeah, going back to the issue, social issues as a political issue. I personally come from what was known as wedge issues.
Wedge issues, yeah.
And I feel that in reality, all these issues are political tools to mobilize, when in reality the politics comes to being political. And for example, one of the people who was also homosexual was the lead of putting anti-gay marriage initiatives in many close elections, right? So, abortion issues, homosexual issues, right to choose issues, I don't really think, some people really care about abortion, but they use that as a political tool. How much is political mobilization strategy or here concern religious? How much is based on your experience?
Well, I guess it depends on my experience of being, because I've been dealing. I mean, these to me are real people's issues, whether it's women's reproductive health or whether it's or gay and lesbian rights. I mean, you do have, but that's the beauty of our democracy. We're supposed to be, all of these different ideas are presented, and you have competing ideas clashing, and there may be some people who are on power trips on things, and that's human nature. You can't really, help that because that exists. I mean, I think if you're coming from the point of view where we're dealing with a state that has such diversity that you are bound to work on a lot of these divisive issues, whether you're dealing with undocumented immigrants or women's reproductive health or a woman's right to determine how she decides her own health, or somebody someone who's whether the right to die issue. But I hate to use the word cynical about it, but you do have folks who are either cynical or jaded about the whole process because sometimes it's like a game to them. I don't focus on that because you do have folks who are, who would use that kind of political power to make things, But for me, at least my experience has been, and I hope I don't lose sight of that I'm doing what I'm doing because I believe in the issues that I care for, and personally, they affect me. So, whether my husband and I can take care of each other, is what I care about. That's, to me, the protection provided by the law, with all of the rights and responsibilities associated with being married, that affects me personally, and that affects a lot of my, friends and family members. So, you do have all of these folks who may have the money to control how things are shaped, but, at the end of the day, it's you, me, who are voting. So, I'm sorry, I hope to me that's, there is, you can end up being cynical about the process, but I tend not to, I don't focus on that because as long as I can make it easier for the next generation to have a better lives, that's to me what's important.
So I'm going to ask a question here, especially with people. So one of the things that was handed out, and we'll put it up on Ironman as well, we have a legislative calendar.
Yeah.
So can you say a little bit about how that kind of rhythm of that works?
Yeah. So this legislative calendar that I got.
So if you didn't get a copy, we'll put it up on Ironman.
Yeah. This is basically how each legislation has to go through this process. Any ideas you may have, if it's something that you think needs to be addressed, but not everything has to be legislated. I'm from that, I was like, when we were working on a bill dealing with riding your bike and the driver needs to provide 3 feet of space between, the cycle, and the car, I'm like, do we really need to do that? But when accidents are happening and people are getting killed, sometimes you have to legislate that. But any idea that you have, so, these legislations originate from somewhere, whether it's from an organization, a person, or from the member or the legislator himself or herself. They have to go through the legislative process, and they go through both houses of the legislature, and both houses have to pass it. If the other house made some amendments, the originating house has to confer with the amendments of the other house, and then it goes to the governor. But it's a long process. It's about an 8-month process. The members are going to be inaugurated on December 1st. But from here on, we've already been looking at different ideas to propose. So right now, in fact, tomorrow, we have our meeting in the Speaker's office where we sit down and talk about some of the ideas that people have brought forward. And from that idea, it gets sent to our legislative council. So these are where the lawyers come into play. So you could be a lawyer and be a legislative lawyer. where you actually draft the legislation. From that gets introduced in from year on, and it has to go through the policy analysis process, and then it goes to the fiscal committee to determine the cost of the legislation, of how much it would affect the state in implementing that policy. It goes from one house, goes to the next house, the next house does the same thing. Any amendments that added goes back to the original house. It gets concurred, or if not concurred, then they do a conference committee. That rarely happens. Or maybe once every 5 years we have a big idea like that has to be done, like workers' compensation or things like that. And then the governor has so many days to sign it. Any legislation that passed will go into effect the first of the following year, unless they were enacted with what we call urgency clause, that as soon as the governor signs that bill, it becomes law that day. So a lot of our legislation can either be enacted, most of them get enacted and they go into effect the 1st of January the following year. Some get, some would have a delayed effect to allow the executive branch a longer time to come up with regulations in implementing it. So sometimes it would take 18 months, sometimes 2 years. So like if we enact legislation like next year, instead of going into January 1st, 2016, we would say the law would take into effect July 1st of 2016, as opposed to January 1st of 2016. In addition to legislation, every year we have to pass the state budget, and thankfully for the past 3 years, we've been fortunate enough that we passed the budget before the start of the fiscal year. California's fiscal year starts July 1st through June 30th, as opposed to the federal government's fiscal year, which starts October 1st to September 30th. Don't ask me why we have a different, but that's been like that since the beginning of California.
So one of the things we pay attention to is agenda setting and political institutions. So in the Speaker's office, how much discretion or power does the Speaker's office have in terms of prioritizing certain things? Like, is there kind of
we do have that. So the Democratic, so the legislature, the Assembly, well, both houses of the legislature are controlled by the Democrats. So in the Assembly, so the Assembly Democratic Caucus go on their retreat. Same way with the Senate Democrats. They go into their retreat and figure out any ideas or any big ticket items, what we call big ticket items that they want to. So like last year, we had the water bond. One of the things that they.
So is that once a year that happens?
The retreat happens every year. Yeah. So that's and of course the Speaker has a lot of influence on how things are shaped, and that's one of the roles that we do as policy consultants to the Speaker. We're kind of like the traffic cops. Most of the legislation, literally, every day that the bills are introduced, I compile it and I send it to all the people I know in the Capitol. Not just not just our policy unit, but all of our committee staff and any other staff who's interested. Because I literally would read the digest, the summary of each legislation. And every year we get about, I'd say on the Assembly side, about 2,500 legislation gets introduced each year. So between the two houses, it's about 5,000 bills. And some of them are, pretty mundane. Some are big ticket items. So, but it's, when you think about it, like the fact that you cannot text or call while you're driving, that was a Californian. that was a California thing. California started that. We enacted that legislation about 3 or 4 years ago now. You know, the seatbelt laws. Seatbelt laws were a feature of California. The helmet laws was a feature of California. We have a lot of legislation that you know, they say for the rest, you know, as California goes, the rest of the country goes. Not every state would say that. But we do have, you know, we're probably, I mean, because we're the biggest state in the country. I mean, we are the you know, the 8th largest economy in the world. I mean, our economy is bigger than Brazil, Russia, Italy. So, I mean, if we are our own country, you know, we're big. So we have a lot of competing ideas, and that's where, you know, civic participation, your engagement is crucial. I know that some of you are probably, I mean, I hope that being in public policy or in political science, you're already engaged, but, you know, you may think you're not going to have any effect. Oh, believe me, if you call your district office right now, they're going to pay attention, especially for you guys. I mean, how many of you are going to be in school for the next 2 or 3 years? And you guys heard about
The tuition
hike, right? So hopefully, I mean, my boss and pretty much the leadership has said, it's hell to the no. You know. So hopefully we can come up with something that would avoid, because that's like a 25% increase.
5% each year.
5% each for the next 5 years. I mean, the previous speaker, Johnny Perez, was instrumental in getting, you know, he offered the middle class scholarship act, and that I think went into effect. I think it's going into effect for the next academic year, or if not this year, because I know we enacted it last year, so I think it started this year. It helped a lot. I mean, when we made the master, you know, when we did the master plan offering free education to anybody who qualifies to go to UC or the CSU, and we got honored that. And it's been 1965 when that master plan was crafted. So, but these
So out of those 5,000 people that introduced, how many passed?
about half, and then the governor gets a crack at stuff. You know, I think for this year, of the 1,400 that made it into his desk, I think he vetoed 300 of them. So it's you know, it's working in the state legislature and then trying to see how things get implemented in the executive branch. You would be so surprised, because I don't know if any of you have I mean, you guys probably have dealt with DMV at the very least, getting your driver's license. And you kind of wonder, it's like, how in the world did they get anything done in state government when you have to deal with all of the bureaucratic process? I mean, I thought working in the state legislature is a nightmare, just because we have layers and layers of things to go through. The executive branch is even, to me, a different world of its own. But it helps working in the legislature, because when we deal with with the agencies and the departments, they kind of pay attention because we control their budget. So they know that if we're calling and we're concerned about something, they got to pay attention, because like when you're dealing with a foster child or a clinic that is not getting its payment for all of the services that they provide to the indigent population, I mean, those things matter. This is like the wheels of justice. So we're all working together to keep that wheel.
So how would that process work? Because I mean, you can have oversight in the committee hearings, but say an agency is not implementing things adequately, and someone calls the district office and complains. Where does that go from there in terms of becoming a bigger deal?
So when we get constituent calls at our district offices, and our field representatives call us and figure out, it's like, who do we call? Who do we? You know, it's like, so we have, you know, most of the agencies and departments, they have their own governmental affairs people or intergovernmental affairs folks. So they're the ones that we call. It's like, hey, what's going on this one? And they find out what's going on. And if we are hearing a lot of those things happening like that, then we're like, wait a minute, how come this thing is happening? It's like, what's going on with our assisted living facilities? Why are we having all of these abuses going on? I mean, it's like, where's the Department of Health, the Public Health, and Department of Social Services who are providing, or licensing and regulating this thing? So we call them and bring them into the office. It's like, what's going on? Why is this happening? I was like, where are the inspectors? Are you responding to the complaints? And that's how we try to shape the policies, or even make it even better. And if we need to follow up with legislation, if things are not being followed the way we intended it, because we do. I mean, it's like we have to enact legislation in a general manner that would affect everybody. You cannot, one of the parameters of enacting legislation is you cannot single out people, because that would run afoul of our Constitution. So you have to do something that would have, what we call general law. It will have an impact to the general population. So from all of the things that we do, we have to come up with, sometimes we follow up with cleanup legislation because some things are not working, or we miss something, because any legislation that you enact will have some kind of unintended consequences. Sometimes very minor, sometimes it could be major. This is, we are pretty much a laboratory. We're like we're coming up with all kinds of stuff, and that's, and everything that we do, we hope it's making the system, our society a better place. And from what you use to paint your wall, that gets, we have some, we would have something to say about it, because we want to make sure that everything that we are using is environmentally safe and doesn't, affect people's health. So, I mean, when you think about it, everything, as soon as you're born into this process. You can't really get out of it. I mean, you may not think that the state government or the federal government or your local government, has nothing to do with you. It's like, we have everything to do with you. The only thing that is certain is death and taxes, right? And your taxes, hopefully, we're using for better purposes.
So one last thing I'm going to ask, and open up to you guys for a couple more, and then we'll end. I mean, some of this, by the way, so hope you guys are, some of you guys see taking notes, just pay attention to some of these key things in terms of implementation. One of the things, especially thinking about the industry and Hollywood, one of the common complaints is that California is not doing enough to retain businesses, right? And clearly now, with Vancouver and Toronto and so many places, New Mexico, where Hollywood can go and do its thing, how does that struggle look like in terms of what California needs to offer to continue keeping production?
So we actually just enacted, we've increased our tax incentives to keep Hollywood in California. When you hear of all of these production companies going out of state or even out of the country to shoot some of the films, that affects our economy. I mean, because people are not working here, and sometimes the people we have here would go and move to those states like Louisiana or like right now New York has the highest. They're offering $420 million in tax credits for production companies to shoot in New York. I mean, in as much as we wanted to match that, we couldn't. We maxed out at 300 right now, $300 million. To keep the production companies to stay in California. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we're hoping to like help help keep some of these companies here, and also to work with making sure that we have the workforce, that can be employed, because if you don't have the workforce, then of course that affects their bottom line too. And some of the regulatory burdens, if we can navigate through and eliminate some of the burdens of doing business in California. That's
So do
always,
you do a kind of cost benefit analysis?
So,
Do you offer
yeah,
these incentives?
you'll always have, and our, all of these institutions, whether it's research universities or think tank like RAND or the Public Policy Institute of California, which you were affiliated with before, we try to get information from them, research materials from them to see the effect of these tax incentives, that they're really helping to keep those production companies to stay in California. So it's a partnership that we try to establish, not just within the state government, because we do have our research units, whether it's the Governor's Office of Planning and Research or the Legislative Analyst Office that kind of assess the impact of some of our policies. But sometimes we would get a third party to conduct these analyses, whether it's your school or any of the UC programs. So, yeah.
Any other questions that people have? Either in terms of, one of the things I'm hoping that some of you who are interested in public service or working government or thing is to think about some of the opportunities and ways that you might get involved, internships and the like.
Yeah, I mean, UC Central Sacramento they have the internship program, summer program, and I think each semester they also do, they would have it. I mean, I think it's a year-round program, and we do use interns, believe me. I had an intern 2 years ago, and I had her working on LGBT foster care. So she was researching some of the programs that different counties have enacted and trying to figure out, like, hey, which ones are working and which ones we can probably try to get the other counties to, because at the end of the day, we're looking at how things are done on the local level, because that's where the rubber meets the road. It's like we're kind of up here looking at things that sometimes you kind of, you have the bird's eye view, but you can, like what I said, you would enact something that when it trickles down on the local level, it ain't working the way you thought it was going to be. So that's the kind of stuff that we, our intern, work on. So I hope you were able to get some experience like that. We do a lot of other mundane things, whether it's copying things or or answering constituent calls and things like that. But I wish I knew about this when I was in college, because it was something that, I mean, now that I'm doing it, I'm having a blast. I keep telling folks, it's like, God, I mean, I guess I'm just kind of like, my personality fits working in the Capitol, because I'm kind of type A. I'm like an adrenaline junkie. I mean, every day is different. I am working on issues, one day I'm working on something, the next day it's different. So it's like, it's just like, it's very dynamic. And I guess that's just my personality.
Maybe cut you off, but
That's okay.
I had a question regarding the vote order turnout and how it kind of affects the Capitol as a whole.
Yeah.
What's the conversation in the Capitol? Are we trying to, besides waiting for a presidential election, what are we trying to do as a state to influence to get more people to vote, or do we even want? I mean, I've heard a lot of elected officials that have been around saying we don't really want to get or encourage people to vote because it kind of changes. We don't really know how to vote.
know, to me, because like you're voting on your leader who's supposed to be making decisions for you. So if, I mean, the lower voter turnout to me is either a sign where people think, oh, everything is okay, that, you know, we're just gonna go with what we have. But when something is bad, that's when, you know, when the economy is down to, you know, too, that's when you get, you know, some people to get out and vote. But when you have like pressing issues that matter, you know, that you need the, you know, you need voters to be engaged. You need to, you know, you need to have them have a say on how we move forward. Because like, you know, we have a number of initiatives that some of them, you know, a couple of them passed, a few of them died, whether it was something to do with the insurance commissioner being able to regulate or stop health plans from imposing higher premiums, which a lot of, you know, a lot of states, or 39 states already have that authority, you know, that have granted their insurance commissioners authority to stop health plans from imposing those higher rates unless they can justify that those rates were reasonable for what, you know, what they're going to be offering. I guess you know, unless you have, I mean, voter participation or voter turnout, I guess it's affected by how I would say controversial or juicy things are before you get them in. But I think, you know, because you're electing members who will be making decisions for you, for the rest of this, you know, I mean, for you and the rest of the population. I think it's running for office need to engage their constituents because they're going to be representing them. And if you only have a tiny segment of your district voting for you, I mean, you know, I know it's like, well, they voted and I got elected, and so you got to represent the entire district. You got to represent all of the people who live in your district. But when you only have a few voting to elect someone or voting to enact pieces of, like, you know, initiatives that affect the rest of the country, I mean, I think it's a disservice not to have that participation of the entire.
That's where you might also get that mismatch.
Yeah.
If there are people that are responding to that 29%,
Yeah.
you might get an issue where an even bigger group that wasn't active before is affected by something, say by insurance rate hikes.
Yeah.
Right? And then they decide, I mean, right now, yeah, there's a lot of money poured into the no on that by insurance companies. And
Yeah. $30 million were poured in by the health insurance companies to defeat that initiative. So, what does that tell you? But,
one last question here, and then we'll break it down. You can ask 2 questions.
Well, the first one is, well, I heard you talk about it, but I didn't catch was how do you inspire the common person to vote? You guys said 27, 29% of the people voted only, which is even worse than what I heard, which was 38%. And I remember when I was asking my homemakes and stuff like, where do you vote? Some just flat out didn't care. And I know that's the case for, well, apparently that's the case for a lot of people. How do you inspire the common man or woman?
And what's the second question?
Vote.
Let's take both.
And the second one was, well, I work with a group called CalPERT.
yeah.
And
Oh, I get calls from them every night asking to join, you know, to renew my membership. Yeah. Yeah.
a few weeks ago, maybe like a week before Halloween,
Yeah.
I was working with some others to sign people to vote. I was helping people register to vote. And I came across, well, okay, their argument was they didn't believe in the American system. Like, they didn't believe in how things were. How do I combat that? How do I come back to the question off of that? Like, I thought my own ways of how to like deal with it is usually just put convince them to vote, because the vote really does matter.
Mhm.
And they want it.
I think it boils down to voter education. I mean, we all live, busy lives, and sometimes things, happen that you think it doesn't affect you. And I think when you peel the layers of all of the issues that affect your life, I mean, I think people, I think that kind of engagement will get there. You just got to find the common ground. It's like if there are common, there are issues that happen to your friend. If you're trying to convince your friend that you should get out and vote. I mean, identify any particular issues that your friend is interested in, and I think that's where. I think that's how we can get more engagement of the masses. Whether your friend is in the process of buying a new car, or even just going shopping. I mean, you guys go out there, use your debit card, and little you know, your debit card is probably getting hacked. We have to do something about that.
Or even, I'd say even something concretely like your cable internet bills
Yeah.
have been going up and up, right?
Yeah.
That's entirely to do with regulation.
Yeah. I mean, you
State
have,
and federal levels.
Or right now, the president just said, was talking about net neutrality, because some of the internet providers, IT service providers are talking about doing the fast lane and the slow lane and charging. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Everybody should have equal access to the internet. And if you try to tier things up where the person who can pay the most will have the most, the fastest access to it. So things like that. I mean, our lives are so intertwined. Sometimes you just don't think about how some of these things actually affect you and me on the personal level. And those things get decided on, by the government.
For people in class, that's the third face of power,
Yeah.
that a lot of you didn't answer adequately. But, right, so first you need to know that there's an issue that's a problem. It's not just a private problem, that there's something that government could do to get involved. And then there's all these collective action problems you need to overcome, to form organizations, get organized, agenda set, and then get the legislature to do
Identify, get organized, and legislate.
Yeah, but it's a heavy lift. But part of the first step is that consciousness raising, right? You think that none of this matters, but it touches you every single day, depending on the kind of issues you're talking about.
The second question is a harder one to even. I mean, if you have someone who doesn't believe in our system of government, tell that person to see what other countries are doing. I mean, would you rather have a system like what they have in the Middle East, where you don't have a say on anything? Coming from the Philippines, where I never thought that I would do this kind of work, and my friends are all telling me, I was like, God, when you were in the Philippines, the last thing we thought you would do would be in politics, and here I am in the middle, in the thick of it. When you know that your voice matters, I just don't know if there are any other systems that can match. I mean, maybe there is. I think what we have here, we're the longest, serving democracy in the world. When you have countries that are overthrowing their government because of corruption and their system is not working, our system may be, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we're a young country, if you think about it. We've only been around since 1776. Our Constitution is from 1789. We have We have countries that have been around longer than all the other countries combined. So, so we're slowly changing things for the better, but I just don't know how to. If you can.
Well, one thing else I should say, and we'll just close right here. We can talk and talk as well. I mean, for me, so there's different levels, right? So there are people who would never ever get involved, and this is part of the thing. You're like trying to convince someone. You can kind of tell after a couple of minutes if it's going to be a long conversation. You're never going to get anywhere, or you can convince them. But then there are people. I mean, even for someone like me who have analyzed policy and studied politics for so long, you can get cynical and jaded. And for me, actually going to the state capitol was really you kind of get some of that idea, right? You go and you actually like go to the chambers. It's like you get some of that renewal, and I think that's part of the challenge too. Is not just getting people who are not involved to get involved, but people who are involved to not get too jaded and burnt out. And I would say if you haven't gone to Sacramento, do so, or if you're in the area, contact your representative beforehand and get them to take you to the chambers. Like it's pretty amazing to actually. That was the first time I'd done that, right? And Andrew brought me out to the book. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Right? So, but thank you, Eric, for taking your.